21. Legendary Black LGBTQ+. Stars and the tragic stories behind their deaths. Then and now, 2025. They were legends on stage, in politics, and on the page, but behind the fame, they hid painful secrets the world wasn't ready to hear. These 21 Black LGBTQ+ icons broke barriers only to die in silence, rejection, or total isolation. Some were erased from history books. Others were denied love, dignity, or even a proper goodbye. This isn't just a tribute, it's a wake-up call. At Legends of Black Excellence, we're exposing the truth they carried and the silence they endured. Watch closely, share boldly, and tell us which of these forgotten heroes deserves to be known by everyone. Let's talk about it. Sylvester. Born in Los Angeles in 1947. Sylvester James Jr. exploded onto the music scene in the 1970s with a voice that refused to be ignored and a presence that challenged every norm of gender, sexuality, and sound. Often hailed as the Queen of Disco, Sylvester wasn't merely a performer, he was a revolution wrapped in sequins. His most iconic track, You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, wasn't just a club anthem. It was a declaration of freedom, a sonic rebellion against a world that demanded conformity. Openly gay in an era when doing so could destroy careers, Sylvester stood defiantly in heels, flowing gowns, and full makeup, blending gospel-infused falsetto with unapologetic flamboyance. He carved out a space not just in the music industry, but in the hearts of a generation craving authenticity. Behind the glitter and booming vocals, though, was a man who fought daily battles against homophobia, racism, and the music industry's attempts to sanitize his identity. By the early 1980s, the disco era that once embraced him had fallen out of favor, and so had the mainstream music world's support. As his fame dimmed, another invisible threat emerged. Sylvester began experiencing alarming symptoms: fatigue, weight loss, persistent coughing, and after months of uncertainty, he received the devastating news he was HIV positive. It was 1984, and the stigma surrounding AIDS was as dangerous as the disease itself. The public, the industry, and even friends grew distant. Yet Sylvester refused to let the illness define his final chapter. He continued performing when he could, raising awareness, and even left specific instructions that his estate support AIDS charities after his death. His final days were quiet, marked by solitude and physical decline. On December 16, 1988, he passed away at just 41 alone in his San Francisco home. Despite his enormous impact, there was no national tribute, no major industry recognition. In the decades since, Sylvester's voice has only grown louder in memory. His music remains a staple of queer liberation, his image a symbol of resistance and celebration. His life illuminated the cost of being radically oneself in a world not yet ready. And though he died in silence, his legacy blazes with undying light. A star who in living his truth gave generations permission to do the same. Paris Dry. Paris Dupree was not just a performer, she was the heartbeat of an entire underground movement. As the founder of the legendary House of Dupree and one of the originators of voguing Paris, helped turn ballroom culture into a vibrant world of survival art and community for countless Black and Latinx LGBTQ+ youth. Her name rang out through the dance halls of New York City during the 1980s and 1990s, where battles weren't just about dance, they were about identity, pride, and visibility. Paris gained broader attention through the groundbreaking documentary Paris is Burning 1990, which introduced the world to voguing and the fierce resilience of the ballroom scene. But while the spotlight momentarily touched her, the reality of her later life remained in the shadows. She was a mother figure to many, yet as she aged and the ballroom scene evolved, the community she helped build slowly forgot its queen. Living in a modest apartment, Paris struggled with failing health. She began experiencing chronic fatigue, unhealed sores, and weakness. When she finally saw a doctor, the diagnosis came swiftly: AIDS. The stigma surrounding the illness only deepened her isolation. As her strength waned, visits became rare, calls fewer. The bright lights of the ballroom faded into quiet nights spent alone. One winter evening in 2011, Paris succumbed to complications from AIDS. She died alone, her body discovered days later when neighbors noticed the silence. No headline marked her passing. No ball honored her memory. Her death mirrored the fate of too many pioneers forgotten in life, remembered too late. But in the world she helped shape, her legacy remains etched in every spin, pose, and battle. Without Paris, there is no ballroom. Without her courage, there is no stage for those who followed. Though the world let her disappear, Paris Dupree lives on in every moment of defiant dance. James Baldwin. James Baldwin, born in Harlem in 1924, was one of the most fearless writers and thinkers of the 20th century. A novelist, essayist, and civil rights activist, Baldwin exposed the painful intersections of race, sexuality, and class in America. His works, Go Tell It on the Mountain, The Fire Next Time Giovanni's Room, were not just literature, they were truth set on fire. As a gay black man in a time when both identities were targets of systemic oppression, Baldwin's life was marked by exile and emotional solitude. He spent most of his adult years in France seeking refuge from America's racism and homophobia. Yet even across the Atlantic, he never stopped confronting injustice. His pen never lost its edge, and his voice never lost its moral clarity. Behind the brilliance, however, was a body quietly crumbling. Years of smoking and stress led to a diagnosis of stomach cancer in the 1980s. Baldwin continued writing through agonizing pain, determined to leave behind a legacy that could outlive his physical decline. He refused to be silenced, even as the cancer spread rapidly. In 1987, in Saint-Paul-de-Vence, France, Baldwin passed away at age 63. His final moments were far from the stages he once stood on, or the protests he helped inspire. Though surrounded by some family and friends, he remained emotionally isolated, a consequence of years spent as a prophet unwelcome in his homeland. Baldwin's death was not just the loss of a literary genius, it was the extinguishing of one of America's most necessary moral compasses. But his words endure. They continue to challenge, provoke, and inspire. In a world still grappling with the truths he unearthed, Baldwin remains a voice for the unseen, the silenced, and the brave. His fire never truly went out. Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin's fingerprints are on some of the most pivotal moments in American civil rights history. Yet his name is still too often omitted from textbooks. Born in 1912 in West Chester, Pennsylvania, Rustin was a strategist without equal. He organized the 1963 March on Washington, advised Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on nonviolent resistance, and helped shape the very framework of protest movements that followed. But Rustin had a secret society didn't want to forgive. He was a gay black man. Though his sexuality was known among close allies, it was frequently used as a weapon to marginalize him even within civil rights circles. While others stood at the podium, Rustin stayed behind the curtain by choice and by necessity. His brilliance was indispensable, but his identity made him a target. Despite the discrimination, Rustin never stopped fighting for justice. As the AIDS crisis unfolded in the 1980s, he became an outspoken advocate for LGBTQ+ rights, aligning his lifelong fight for racial equity with the battle for queer visibility. He knew firsthand what it meant to live in silence, and he refused to accept that for the next generation. Later in life, Rustin suffered from health complications, including abdominal pain and fatigue. Though not confirmed to be AIDS-related, his death in 1987 occurred during a time when many in his community lacked adequate access to medical care and faced severe social isolation. He collapsed in his New York apartment and passed away shortly after at the age of 75. His longtime partner, Walter Nagel, was by his side, a rare comfort in an era that too often denied queer love its legitimacy. Rustin's name is now slowly being restored to the annals of American greatness. But the delay in recognition speaks volumes. He gave everything for a freer world and died largely uncelebrated. His legacy demands we do better by remembering, by honoring, and by finally saying his name. Willie Ninja. Born in 1961 in Queens, New York. Willie Ninja didn't just dance, he redefined movement. Widely recognized as the godfather of voguing, Willie fused martial arts precision with fashion-forward elegance to create a dance form that broke boundaries and birthed a culture. He founded the legendary House of Ninja and gained international acclaim through the landmark 1990 documentary, Paris is Burning. Willie's presence was unmistakable. Every gesture, every pose radiated confidence and pride. But behind the angular grace and runway fierceness was a man navigating a world that wasn't built to protect people like him. As an openly gay black man, Willie lived through the height of the AIDS crisis. Though he preached safe sex and advocated for awareness, the disease found its way into his life. He began to grow weaker in the early 2000s. He lost weight, developed heart issues, and eventually needed help with daily tasks. Without adequate health insurance, he relied on the generosity of friends and fans for basic care. Though revered in the ballroom world, he remained relatively unknown outside it, and that obscurity cost him dearly. In September 2006, at just 45 years old, Willie Ninja died of heart failure linked to AIDS complications. He passed away quietly in a New York hospital far from the stage lights that once bathed him in glory. But his legacy did not dim with his passing. After his death, dancers and houses across the world paid tribute through dance battles, memorial balls, and community outreach. Voguing lives on, not as a relic of 1980s subculture, but as a global symbol of queer resistance and black artistry. Willie Ninja taught the world that movement could be defiance, that elegance could be armor, and that truth, when posed boldly, can never be erased. Essex Hemphill. Essex Hemphill was never afraid of hard truths. Born in Chicago in 1957 and raised in Washington, D.C., he emerged as a revolutionary voice in American literature during the 1980s and early 90s. As a black gay poet and activist, Hemphill laid bare the painful intersections of racism, homophobia, and desire in a world that rarely offered space for someone like him. His writing was sharp, urgent, and deeply personal, each word both an act of resistance and a plea for recognition. Hemphill's breakthrough came with anthologies like Brother to Brother and Ceremonies, which confronted the silence surrounding black queer life, especially during the height of the AIDS crisis. He challenged both white gay institutions and black communities to face their own blind spots. In doing so, he became a lifeline for countless individuals who saw themselves in his uncompromising words. Essex wrote not to entertain, but to survive and to give voice to others surviving in silence. But the disease he fought so hard to name eventually found its way into his life. In the early 1990s, Hemphill was diagnosed with AIDS. He refused to let that define his remaining years. Even as his body weakened, suffering from relentless night sweats, weight loss, and muscle deterioration, he continued to write, to speak, and to build. His small room in Philadelphia became both his sanctuary and battleground. On November 4th, 1995, Essex Hemphill passed away at just 38 years old. There was no grand funeral, no national mourning, only a few close friends holding vigil beside a man who had spent his life writing for a community that was often invisible. His unfinished manuscripts sat quietly beside him, fragments of brilliance never completed. Though gone too soon, Hemphill's legacy burns on. He turned poetry into protest and identity into a sword. His death marked the loss of a singular voice, but his words still echo wherever truth dares to speak. Ron Simmons. Ron Simmons was a fighter not in the spotlight, but in the trenches. Born in 1950, he became a quiet force behind one of the most critical grassroots responses to the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the Black LGBTQ+ community. As executive director of Us Helping Us, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit, Simmons transformed lives not through celebrity, but through unwavering compassion and service. A gay black man at a time when each of those identities carried intense stigma, Simmons chose to stand firm in his truth. In the 1980s and 90s, he emerged as a vocal advocate for black gay men, a group disproportionately impacted by HIV, but often excluded from mainstream narratives and healthcare strategies. His leadership was hands-on. He didn't just raise awareness, he provided counseling, testing support, and a safe space when there were few to be found. But even the most committed warriors are not immune to battle wounds. Ron began experiencing chronic health issues in the 2000s, fatigue illness, and later severe stomach and heart complications. It was only in his final years that the truth emerged. Simmons had been privately living with HIV, the very disease he had fought so tirelessly to help others navigate. The shame that still lingered in society likely kept him silent, even in his own suffering. In May 2020, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Ron Simmons passed away due to heart failure at the age of 70. Though his partner was present, the moment carried a quiet sadness. There were no major news headlines, no citywide mourning. Yet the impact of his work stretched far beyond what any obituary could capture. Ron Simmons didn't need a microphone to change lives. His legacy is etched in the lives he helped save, the families he supported, and the voices he empowered to speak their truth. He fought a war for dignity, and for many he won it. Tony Washington. In the golden haze of the 1970s disco boom, Tony Washington's voice cut through like velvet thunder. As the dynamic lead singer of the group The Dynamic Superiors, he made history not only for his soaring falsetto, but also for his visibility as an openly gay black man in the soul and disco world long before society was ready to embrace that kind of boldness. Born and raised in Washington, D.C., Tony didn't just perform, he radiated. He wore makeup, styled his hair in unapologetic fashion, and embraced androgyny with a grace that challenged music industry norms. The group's 1975 hit Shoo Shoo Shine may have charted, but Tony's presence was the real revolution. He was a trailblazer singing about love while existing openly in his truth, defying pressures to hide or conform. But being ahead of your time comes with a cost. As disco's popularity faded and conservative backlash swelled, Tony was pushed further to the fringes. Record deals dried up, invitations vanished. The industry that once called him bold quietly turned its back. Relegated to dimly lit local clubs, Tony kept performing not for fame, but to hold on to the one thing that never failed him, his music. Behind the performances, however, lay a deepening struggle. Isolated and increasingly forgotten, Tony contracted HIV during a period when information was scarce and public support even scarcer. By the late 1980s, he was no longer able to work. Friends drifted away. As his body deteriorated from AIDS-related complications, his world became a single-room apartment in a D.C. housing project. In 1989, Tony collapsed and died alone. His body wasn't discovered for days. No headline marked his passing. No industry tribute followed. The man who once sang with soul and elegance died nameless to many, but not to those who understood what he represented. Tony Washington wasn't just a singer. He was a symbol of courage in an industry afraid of authenticity. He paid the price for truth, but in death his legacy demands to be remembered with dignity, respect, and the spotlight he always deserved. Glenn Burke. Glenn Burke could run, swing, and field like few others. Born in 1952 in Oakland, California, he made it to Major League Baseball as an outfielder for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and later, the Oakland A's. But what truly set him apart wasn't just his athleticism, it was his honesty. Glenn Burke was the first MLB player to come out as gay during his professional career. In a world where masculinity reigned supreme, that truth was a seismic act of bravery. Teammates and management weren't prepared. Though Burke never made a dramatic announcement, his open lifestyle and refusal to hide who he was caused unease in the league. Dodgers management allegedly offered him a financial bonus to marry a woman and suppress the rumors. He declined. His career soon began to stall. By 1980, he was out of the majors not because of performance, but because of prejudice. After leaving baseball, Burke remained a local sports legend in the Bay Area. He played in gay softball leagues, marched in pride parades, and became a beacon in the LGBTQ+ athletic community. But the scars ran deep. The rejection from his sport, the pressures of fame, and the pain of hiding in plain sight eventually led to mental and emotional struggles. He began using drugs and living on the margins, drifting between motels and temporary housing. In the 1990s, Glenn Burke was diagnosed with AIDS. With few resources and dwindling health, he was admitted to a nursing home in Oakland. On May 30th, 1995, he passed away at just 42 years old. His sister and a few friends were present. No tributes from MLB, no commemorations from the teams he once played for. Today, Burke's name is finally receiving the recognition it deserves. He laid the groundwork for openly gay athletes in sports at a time when it could have cost him everything, and it did. Glenn Burke played with integrity, lived with pride, and died with far too little acknowledgement. But his legacy is growing. Every Pride Night hosted by a major sports team owes a debt to the man who dared to be first. Octavia E. Butler. Octavia Estelle Butler was a literary visionary who reshaped science fiction forever. Born in 1947 in Pasadena, California. Butler didn't see herself in the genre she loved, so she wrote herself in. As a tall, introverted black woman with a stutter and a mind light years ahead of her time, she defied every stereotype that science fiction had to offer. Her groundbreaking novels like Kindred Parable of the Sower and Dawn combined speculative futures with real-world trauma, racism, environmental collapse, gender, and sexuality, all told through characters who looked and lived like her. While Butler never publicly labeled her sexuality, she was widely acknowledged in literary and queer circles as a lesbian who cherished privacy. Her life's work quietly uplifted same-sex love, non-binary identities, and radical inclusivity without needing to announce it outright. Her advocacy lived in her characters and the futures she imagined, worlds where society could be reimagined from the margins. Despite her acclaim, she was the first science fiction writer to win a MacArthur Genius. Grant Butler lived a life of quiet solitude. In the late 1990s, she began experiencing debilitating health issues, including chronic fatigue and severe back pain. Diagnosed with a degenerative spinal condition, her ability to write physically became more difficult with each passing year. Still, she kept pushing, unwilling to abandon the stories still living in her mind. On February 24, 2006, Butler collapsed outside her home in Lake Forest Park, Washington. Some reports say it was a fatal fall brought on by dizziness. Others suggest complications from her spinal disorder. Regardless of the cause, she passed away at the age of 58 alone, far from the literary world that now reveres her. Her death was quiet, but her legacy is anything but. Today, Octavia E. Butler's name is synonymous with Afrofuturism, feminist science fiction, and radical black imagination. In life, she wrote about survival. In death, she became proof that stories from the margins don't just matter, they endure. Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde was never one to whisper. A self-described black lesbian mother warrior poet, she spent her life confronting the silence that surrounded the oppressed. Born in 1934 in Harlem, New York, Lorde wrote with both rage and tenderness, demanding that the world acknowledge the realities of racism, sexism, and homophobia. Her poetry wasn't ornamental, it was revolutionary. Her essays and speeches, including Sister Outsider and the Cancer Journals, challenged systems and inspired movements. Lorde came out as a lesbian in an era when doing so could sever personal and professional ties. She didn't care. Her relationships, her politics, and her body all became sites of activism. She stood proudly at intersections others feared to name. She spoke not just for herself, but for generations of black women and queer people who had long been silenced. In 1978, Lorde was diagnosed with breast cancer. She underwent a mastectomy and later chronicled the experience with unflinching honesty in her writing. The disease returned in the form of liver cancer in the mid-1980s. Despite the pain, Lorde continued to write, lecture, and organize internationally, traveling to Germany, South Africa, and the Caribbean to speak out against injustice. Her words grew sharper as her body weakened. By the early 1990s, her health had declined significantly. Seeking peace and healing, she moved to St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where she spent her final days surrounded by books, candles, and her longtime partner, Gloria Joseph. On November 17, 1992, Audre Lorde passed away at the age of 58. Her last recorded words were two declarations etched into the spirit of her legacy warrior: survivor. But Lorde didn't just survive, she transformed. Her work continues to shape feminist, queer, and anti-racist thought across the globe. She taught us that silence never protects, that difference is a strength, and that poetry can dismantle empires. She lived as if her voice could change the world, because it did. Alvin Ailey. Alvin Ailey didn't just choreograph movement. He crafted liberation. Born in 1931 in Rogers, Texas, Ailey rose from poverty and segregation to become one of the most influential figures in modern dance. In 1958, he founded the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, an institution that brought Black bodies' culture and stories center stage in a world that rarely acknowledged them. His most iconic work, Revelations, remains one of the most performed dance pieces in the world. A visual prayer, a cultural hymn to Black resilience. Ailey's genius lay in his ability to communicate grief, joy, and transcendence without a single word. He gave a language to the unheard, staging spirituals, blues, and gospel music through disciplined beauty and bold emotional truth. Though he was known for his charisma and charm, Ailey remained intensely private, particularly regarding his sexuality. As a gay Black man in mid-20th century America, he lived under the radar, sharing intimate relationships quietly and shielding his personal life from public scrutiny. That silence would follow him even in illness. In the 1980s, Ailey began to suffer from symptoms that he kept hidden from his dancers and the public. Diagnosed with AIDS, he requested his death certificate list the cause of death as a blood disorder, a painful reflection of the stigma that silenced many during the epidemic's darkest years. On December 1, 1989, Alvin Ailey died at age 58 in a New York hospital. Though his final days were quiet, his impact remains thunderous. His dance company continues to tour the world, sharing the stories he once danced in solitude. Ailey's life was a masterpiece of motion and meaning, but his silence around his identity reminds us of the fear even legends had to carry. Today, we remember not just the steps he choreographed, but the truth he had to conceal. Alvin Ailey danced for all of us even when he couldn't speak for himself. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross wasn't just a singer. He was an emotion. Born in 1951 in New York City, his velvet voice became synonymous with romantic longing and timeless elegance. From Never Too Much to Dance with My Father, Luther created love songs that resonated across generations. He sold over 35 million records, won 8 Grammy Awards, and held stages with a grace that few performers could match. But for all the passion he poured into his music, Vandross remained notoriously private. Rumors about his sexuality persisted throughout his career, yet he never publicly addressed them. Industry pressures combined with a deeply homophobic era in Black entertainment meant that even a man as successful as Luther felt compelled to keep a vital part of himself hidden. It wasn't shame, it was survival. He threw himself into his work, becoming a perfectionist in the studio and on stage. Behind the scenes, however, he struggled with health issues. Vandross battled high blood pressure, diabetes, and fluctuating weight throughout his life. In April 2003, he suffered a massive stroke that left him in a coma for nearly 2 months. Though he regained some abilities, he never returned to full strength and never performed live again. On July 1, 2005, Luther Vandross died at age 54 due to complications from the stroke. His death was mourned globally, but much of his truth remained veiled. He left behind a legacy of soul-stirring ballads, yet the man behind the mic had never been able to share the full story of who he was. Today, Vandross's voice still plays at weddings, reunions, and on late-night radio stations, but his life serves as a quiet testament to the cost of silence. For all the love he sang about the world never gave him space to sing his own. Jackie Shane. Jackie Shane was a phenomenon decades ahead of her time. Born in 1940 in Nashville, Tennessee, she defied every social expectation with courage, charm, and an unmatched voice. As one of the earliest Black transgender performers to live and work openly, Shane's very existence was an act of rebellion. But she didn't just break barriers, she sang through them. In the 1960s, Jackie relocated to Toronto, where she became a sensation on the soul and R&B circuit. Backed by her band, she electrified clubs with emotional gospel-infused renditions of hits like Any Other Way. Her stage presence was mesmerizing makeup, perfectly applied hair, flawless, and her confidence radiating from every note. Audiences were drawn not only to her voice, but to her authenticity. She didn't ask for permission, she existed on her own terms. Yet even as she captivated crowds, the world around her remained harsh and unforgiving. In a society that refused to understand her gender identity, Jackie eventually stepped back from the spotlight. By the 1970s, she had retreated almost entirely from public life, choosing a quieter existence in Nashville, far removed from the clubs that once echoed with her voice. In her final years, she lived in near-complete isolation, battling chronic illnesses including high blood pressure and diabetes. Without family nearby or support from the music industry, she quietly declined. In February 2019, Jackie Shane passed away alone in her apartment at age 78. Her death, initially unnoticed, became a wake-up call, a sobering reminder of how easily legends can be forgotten. Only after her passing did the world begin to recognize her legacy. In 2020, she was posthumously awarded a Grammy for Any Other Way. The story of Jackie Shane, a compilation that brought her music and message to a new generation. Jackie Shane lived fearlessly at a time when fear ruled. Her voice, defiant, smooth, unforgettable, wasn't just soul music. It was a declaration of existence. And though she died in quiet solitude, her legacy now sings louder than ever. Vernita Gray. Vernita Gray was a warrior in heels on the front lines of justice from the moment she found her voice. Born in 1948 in Chicago, she became one of the city's earliest and most fearless Black LGBTQ+ activists. Her activism began in the 1960s when she joined the civil rights movement, but it was the intersection of race, sexuality, and gender identity that became her life's mission. Gray was proudly lesbian and unapologetically visible. She worked as a victim's advocate, a writer, and a community organizer, dedicating her life to building spaces for those society tried to push aside. In a world where same-sex love was criminalized and silence was enforced, Vernita spoke out, built coalitions, and helped turn protest into policy. Her activism was relentless, but so was her kindness. She had a way of bringing people in rather than shutting them out. She made national headlines in 2013 when she and her partner Patricia Ewart became the first same-sex couple to legally marry in Illinois months before the state officially legalized same-sex marriage. At the time, Gray was already battling terminal cancer. Knowing her time was limited, she petitioned for early permission to wed, and the courts granted her the right. It was a powerful moment of justice, long delayed, but finally delivered. In her final months, Gray remained a symbol of endurance and love. Cancer ravaged her body, draining her energy, but she stayed vocal, committed to educating others and showing what equality looked like when lived. She passed away on March 18, 2014, at the age of 65, surrounded by love in the city she helped change. There were no secrets about who she was, no apologies for the life she led. Gray didn't just demand equality. She lived it, married it, and fought for others to have it. Her name is now etched in the history of Illinois, not only as an activist, but as a woman who refused to wait for justice. Vernita Gray proved that visibility is power and that the fight for equality isn't just about politics, it's personal. Her life was a love story written in protest, and her legacy still beats in the heart of every freedom movement. Billy Strayhorn. Billy Strayhorn was a quiet revolutionary, a genius whose name too often sat in the shadow of the legend he helped build. Born in 1915 in Dayton, Ohio, and raised in Pittsburgh, Strayhorn's musical brilliance emerged early. A classically trained pianist and composer, he found his true voice in jazz, where emotion flowed through melody and truth lived between the notes. At just 23, he began collaborating with Duke Ellington, composing what would become some of Ellington's most iconic pieces, Take the A Train, Chelsea Bridge, and Lush Life. But while Ellington received the spotlight, Strayhorn often stayed behind the scenes by choice and by necessity. As an openly gay black man in the 1940s, visibility came with enormous risk. Strayhorn lived his truth, but quietly. He refused to hide who he was, yet rarely sought attention for it. His romantic relationships were kept private, but within New York's queer cultural circles, he was embraced and admired. He found refuge among artists, intellectuals, and jazz musicians, creating safe spaces where his identity and creativity could thrive together. He didn't march or speak from pulpits. He spoke through chords and arrangements that pulsed with beauty and defiance. By the early 1960s, Strayhorn's health began to decline. A lifelong smoker, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. As the disease progressed, he continued to compose, refusing to let the illness silence his creativity. He remained deeply connected to his chosen family, including Ellington, who stayed by his side until the end. Billy Strayhorn died on May 31, 1967, at the age of 51. There were no grand tributes on television, no mainstream retrospectives. Even in death, he remained eclipsed by the very man he helped define musically. But history is finally catching up. Today, Strayhorn is recognized as a pioneer of modern jazz and an LGBTQ+ icon who reshaped music from the inside out. His compositions continue to inspire musicians worldwide, and his courage to live authentically, even in silence, made him a quiet but lasting force for liberation. Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker was many things: a singer, dancer, war hero, and civil rights advocate. But above all, she was a force of nature. Born in 1906 in St. Louis, Missouri, she rose from poverty and racial segregation to become one of the most celebrated entertainers of the 20th century. At a time when black performers were often relegated to the margins, Baker took center stage first in the United States, then in Paris, where she found the fame and respect that America had denied her. She was radiant on stage, known for her banana skirt and electric performances, but behind the glamour lived a woman who consistently fought for the rights of others. During World War II, she served as a spy for the French resistance. In the 1950s and 60s, she returned to the U.S. to stand with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and protest racial injustice. Few entertainers ever matched her courage or her reach. While she never publicly discussed her sexuality, Josephine was known to have had intimate relationships with both men and women, including notable figures in the artistic and political spheres. Within LGBTQ+ circles, she remains a celebrated icon, someone who lived authentically, even if never loudly labeled. In the 1970s, despite decades of groundbreaking work, Josephine faced financial ruin. Lavish spending coupled with her fierce independence left her with mounting debts. She continued to perform to support herself and her adopted Rainbow Tribe 12 children from around the world, whom she raised as a symbol of unity and racial harmony. On April 8, 1975, just days after a triumphant comeback show in Paris, celebrating her 50-year career, Baker suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. She died in a hospital in Paris on April 12 at age 68. Though beloved in France, her death was met with quiet reflection rather than global fanfare. Yet her life remains a testament to what it means to rise, resist, and redefine. Josephine Baker didn't just dance on stage. She danced through history, leaving footprints in civil rights, international diplomacy, and queer liberation. Her name lives on not just in music halls, but in the heart of every person who dares to dream bigger than the box they were given. Barbara Jordan. Barbara Jordan's voice was thunder in a storm of silence. Born in 1936 in Houston, Texas, she broke barrier after barrier throughout her political career, becoming the first black woman elected to the Texas Senate since Reconstruction, and later the first Southern black woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. When she spoke during the Nixon impeachment hearings in 1974, America listened, and for the first time, many heard the Constitution through the voice of a black woman. Jordan's speeches weren't just powerful, they were precise, eloquent, and unshakable. She commanded rooms full of men who had never seen someone like her in power. Yet behind the podium, she led a private life. Though in a long-term relationship with educational consultant Nancy Earl, Barbara Jordan never publicly came out. In the rough and often unforgiving world of American politics, disclosure could have cost her everything. Her silence wasn't cowardice. It was strategy. Jordan knew that as a black, disabled, and queer woman, she was already carrying more scrutiny than most could endure. She chose instead to lead with excellence, hoping her example would make space for those who might one day live openly. In the mid-1980s, Jordan began to suffer from multiple sclerosis, a debilitating disease that slowly robbed her of mobility. She continued to teach and inspire working from a wheelchair even as her voice weakened. Later, she faced additional health complications, including leukemia and pneumonia. On January 17, 1996, Barbara Jordan passed away at the age of 59. At her side were a few close friends and Nancy Earl, her quiet partner in life and love. The public still didn't know the full woman behind the legacy. But history is beginning to tell the rest of the story. Barbara Jordan was more than a political pioneer, she was a symbol of layered strength. She may have been forced to live behind a veil, but her words shook that veil loose for others. Her power was never diminished by what she didn't say, it was made even stronger by what she stood for. Mabel Hampton. Mabel Hampton didn't just live through history, she remembered all of it. Born in 1902 in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, she moved to New York City as a teenager and immersed herself in the Harlem Renaissance, becoming a celebrated dancer and performer in the 1920s. But it wasn't just her talent on stage that made Mabel special. It was the unwavering pride with which she lived her truth. An openly lesbian black woman at a time when being either could result in violence or arrest, Mabel never wavered. She had a 46-year relationship with her partner Lillian Foster, a love she described with joy and dignity in interviews and public forums well into her senior years. Together, they built a life rooted in care activism and mutual respect long before society even had language for what they were. Beyond performing, Mabel became a vital figure in LGBTQ+ activism. In her later years, she worked with the Lesbian Her Story Archives in New York, donating thousands of documents, letters, photographs, and oral histories. She understood that memory itself was resistance, that by preserving the past, she was protecting the future. After Lillian passed away in 1978, Mabel continued her mission alone. She spoke at marches, rallies, and panels well into her 80s, reminding young queer people that their fight had roots and that love, no matter its form, had always existed. By the late 1980s, Mabel's health declined. She developed chronic lung disease after years of physical labor and limited medical access. With no biological family and few financial resources, she depended on her community for support. On October 26, 1989, Mabel Hampton passed away in her New York apartment, surrounded not by luxury, but by letters, photos, and fading love notes, a museum of a life well lived. Mabel Hampton never asked to be remembered. She just insisted on being seen. And today she is recognized as one of the most vital custodians of Black queer history, a woman who danced, loved, and resisted with every breath she had. These stories aren't just about tragedy, they're about resilience, visibility, and the price of authenticity. Each of these 21 legends lived in a world that too often refused to see them, yet they still shaped history with grace and power. Their legacies demand more than remembrance. They call for action, empathy, and change. At Legends of Black Excellence, we honor their lives not with silence, but with truth. Which of these stories impacted you most? Do you think the world is finally ready to fully embrace the Black LGBTQ+ voices it once erased? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear from you.